Good afternoon and welcome to BroadCAST, the webinar interview series from the UNL Center for Academic Success and Transition. I'm your host, Dan Hutt, and we are so honored today to have with us Dr. Hayley Shoemaker, opera singer. Dr. Shoemaker, thank you so much for being with us today.
Of course. Thank you for having me, Dan.
Absolutely. We've got a slew of questions from you here, some from me, some from the students. So we'll dive right in if that's okay with you. First of all, what was it like growing up in Quinter, Kansas? And Riley and Tessa of Omaha and Allison of Lincoln would like to know, have you always been interested in music and vocal performance?
Yeah, so not many people know where Quinter is. It's a small Kansas town right off of I-70, and there's really not a lot there. I think we're mainly known for the Dairy Queen. There's about 800 people. So, growing up in a small place, there wasn't much access to opera or performance opportunities. And so we did a few things, at the high school. We had, the spring play and the fall musical. And so I always tried to take advantage of as many opportunities as I could coming from such a small town. But, it was tricky trying to find opportunities, to even just experience music.
Yeah.
Thankfully, Fort Hays State University, which is my alma mater, my undergrad, is only 45 minutes down the road. And so we would try to get there, my parents and I, as often as we could for concerts and things like that. And Fort Hays is actually where I was able to see my first opera in person. But, there were a lot of good things growing up in a small community. But one thing, just access to music was not something that we had. So I really had to work to make those opportunities kind of happen. And in answer to the students' questions, my family's always been very musical,
Okay.
Everybody kind of mostly singing. My dad actually has the most beautiful bass voice, and he actually majored in music at UNL for a year. And so it's kind of funny how things come full circle. He ended up becoming a minister, but my family has always fostered a really big love of music, and I've just always loved to sing since I was little. And so throughout our house, we were always listening we loved the three tenors, if you remember that. So we were always listening to that. We loved musicals, and we would check out, operas on video from the library a lot. And so, I really have always my parents really fostered a love of music, a love of singing. And then, so I've always really been very, very interested in it. And I think from a young age really knew that it was something that I wanted to go into long term.
So you knew about opera from a pretty young age that way.
Yeah. My dad, he has like a fabulous voice. I think he's one of those people that probably could have really gone on and become super famous as a bass singer. And that ended up not being his path, but he knew a lot about opera because of his earlier studies. And so he, we would just talk about it a lot, talk about the different voice types and the famous operas. And I just, from a young age, there was just something about it that I was just really attracted to, that people could make all this sound without any microphones and just sing just some of the most beautiful music. So
yes, I think that's what went through my head when I was discovering opera at UNL too. As a spectator, I went because somebody comped me a couple of tickets to begin with, and I'm from the rock music background and didn't know anything about it, and it just blew me away. I just thought it's not natural for people to be able to sing this way. I just couldn't believe it, and like you say, without any amplification, it was just awesome that way. So, did you always know that you would uh, go to college, and how did it come about that you attended Fort Hays State University?
So I always knew I would go to college, and while I really loved music from a really young age. It came to be my senior year, and I really kind of came down to what I wanted to do, what I wanted to major in, and eventually I did decide upon music. I studied with a voice teacher in high school.
Mm-hmm.
At Fort Hays State University. So, every Monday, my mom would take me down to Hays, and I would take my voice lesson from one of the professors there. And she and I had discussions about, where I would audition to go to college. And, we had talked about some conservatories and things like that. And in the end, I just kind of looked at Fort Hays. It was close to home, but even though it's a smaller school than some, they have a really great music department. And
Wow.
when I auditioned, I happened to get a really great scholarship. And so my voice teacher that I had been studying with had actually retired. So I started with somebody new at Fort Hays, Dr. Joseph Prinachero, who's a wonderful, wonderful voice teacher. But really for me, I think I decided upon Fort Hays partially because the scholarship was so great and I really liked the program and I was familiar with the program.
Mm-hmm.
And, for me, I really did. I love my family. And so the idea that I was only 45 minutes away was really comforting. And
Of
so,
course. Yeah.
it worked out well for me. I probably could have gone somewhere else and maybe done some other programs, but, just at the time it felt like the right fit. And I think in the end, for my musical development, it really was the right choice for me.
It
So,
sounds like there were a lot of really good reasons to go there.
yeah, for sure.
Mia of Omaha and Yana of Lincoln would like to know, did you always know that you would major in music in college?
Yeah, so as I said, it came to be, I knew that I loved music and wanted to continue working on my voice, but, you always have those conversations where people go, well, what are you going to do if you get a music degree? What are you going to do with that? You're either going to be probably an elementary or high school choir teacher, or you can try to perform, and those are kind of your options. And for a long time, I went back and forth because I'd always been interested in medicine too in high school,
Okay.
and I two very different things, I know. And I I kind of was debating what I wanted to do, and I knew if I went the medical degree route is a little bit more straightforward. There's a little bit financially, it's probably a more sound option, but there was there was just something in me that I was like, if I don't pursue it, if I don't pursue music, there's gonna always be a part of me that is gonna wonder what would
What
have
if?
happened if I,
Yeah,
yeah. And I knew that I had to try it and I had to go for it. So um
that's
once I
terrific.
auditioned, and I was getting signs, that the music department really felt right. And just kind of, I was getting signs that year that I think that was the route I was supposed to go. So I majored in vocal performance, and, really have no regrets about sticking it out. I'm very happy that I pursued it. And now I don't ever have to wonder what would have
Yes.
happened.
You made the right choice, I say. I'm sure you would have made a terrific doctor, but you made the right choice. Now, with your father having studied music as well, did you get a great support from your family and friends to pursue that artistic route as opposed to what some people would consider more practical, a business management degree or something like that?
My family has always been super, super supportive, and I'm really grateful for that because I know that's not always the case for
Right.
everyone.
That's right.
But my family, my mom and dad really, they helped to foster it. Like, as I said, my mom, they made sure we could afford voice lessons, and my mom was the one that was driving me every week in high school so that I could go. And
Wow.
every step of the way, when I decided to get more degrees and kind of pursue things further, they've always just been very, very supportive. So for that, I'm incredibly grateful.
That's awesome. Do they make it down here to Lincoln and nearby parts from time to time to watch you perform?
Yes, and that's another. My parents, I mean, if they can get there, they come to just about every one of my, at least my opera performances. And
Oh,
so
that's awesome.
yeah, I do have some extended family here in Lincoln, so it tends to work out pretty easily for them. But I've had
Okay.
performances in Arkansas and different places, and they drive right on down there. They're there.
That's terrific. Very good. Well, when you committed to music and went on for advanced degrees and whatnot, what kind of a future did you imagine for yourself as you were committing further and further onto that path?
Yeah, there were a couple things. There's always the dream. I think every singer has the dream that you're gonna just make your debut and you're gonna just kind of splash onto the scene. And not that that's not realistic, but there's a lot that goes into that. So, I think teaching at a university level had really, I would say, is something I knew that I think I wanted to pursue
Okay.
along with the performing side of things. Performing is great, and I absolutely love it. There's a lifestyle that you kind of have to be okay with. I think that comes with performing, with living out of a suitcase.
Yeah.
Financially, it's just you're kind of depending on that, always on that next gig. And once I kind of understood what that meant, I kind of decided I really would like to pursue something where I have the stability kind of financially, but I still get opportunities to perform and make those two things merge. And also I do really enjoy and have a passion for teaching other students to sing as well. And so um, I think when I first entered my master's degree, I kind of had aspirations of maybe we would move to New York, or maybe I would really try to pursue performing full time. And then as I kind of got into it and I did more summer programs, I discovered that I think, what I'm really doing now, teaching and, performing simultaneously, I think is a really good balance
It
for me.
sure is. That's awesome.
Um,
What
yeah,
about music education most appeals to you? What aspect of that do you most enjoy?
I love it. So I guess for me, I love the one-on-one side of it.
Okay.
Um, what I get to do, I teach applied voice, and I get to work with students individually and help them grow their technique, and getting to help them work on, making their own unique voice heard.
Yeah.
And that side of it for me is what's really appealing. I knew when I got into music, and I have all the respect in the world for music educators in the K through 12 system. I just knew that that was something that I didn't necessarily have a passion for myself.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's for me is I do enjoy that one-on-one aspect of working with a student and getting to see their individual growth.
Yeah.
Um, you know, so that's what I love. You love that moment when you have those aha moments in a lesson when a student goes, "Oh, that felt different." That I feel like I can, in helping them build that confidence. It's
Yeah.
magical.
Oh, that sounds terrific. It really does sound like you've got a nice combination of both performing and teaching going on now. It's a nice balance. Uh, Turning back to students who go the artistic path in college and don't take a practical pathway like from business or STEM or something like that. Did that ever worry you committing to music, that you were going down an unconventional or impractical pathway? that way? Was that of concern for you, or?
Yeah, there were times when it was concerning, just partially like financially, because
Sure.
it's
Yeah.
not as straightforward when you graduate, especially with a performance degree, what your options are. You
Yeah.
kind of have to really take control and make things work for yourself. So I mean, it is concerning. My advice to students kind of pursuing the artistic route, though, is while it can be scary and it feels unconventional, it's really about it. You have the freedom to make your career what you want it to be. Um, and while that can be a really scary thing, I think it can also be a really exciting thing. Um,
Exhilarating. Yes.
yeah. So, I don't know if I pictured that this is what my career would look like, but I'm so happy that I get the opportunity to do really everything I love to do,
You
um,
bet.
and and make it work. And
Right.
so, it's not conventional, it's not as straightforward, and it's definitely, you know, um, financially, it can seem a little scary. But I think if you have the passion for it and you're really willing to look for opportunities and seek them out, you can make it work. You really
Okay.
can.
Okay. Very good. Very good. Have you had to work your share of miserable day jobs in the interim as you're finding your way accordingly?
Not I wouldn't say as bad as some of my colleagues. Like I haven't had to do. I've heard some stories from my colleagues where they really have to hustle at some kind of
Yeah.
unfortunate jobs that they didn't enjoy so much. I've really lucked out. There was a year that I took off, and well, my husband was finishing grad school and I substitute taught, and I thought that was actually a really enriching experience, and taught me a lot about teaching and education. And so that was good. And then I've done some receptionist work,
Uh-huh.
which you know um, was I would say it wasn't totally unpleasant. It probably wasn't like
Sure.
artistically fulfilling, but
You could do worse. Yeah.
yes. Um, but just having been, I was in school a lot, and
Uh-huh.
so that I had a GTA, and that was kind of my work for a really long time. So personally, I haven't had to take on some of that more grunt work that you hear about in the industry, where you're waiting tables,
Right.
in the morning and singing at night. But I definitely have a lot of colleagues that have had to do that, and it's
Sure.
sometimes it's just part of it. And if you're willing to do that in order to do the thing you love, like you make it work. And
Absolutely.
you know
Absolutely. Now, back to the idea of art students and students going into the fine arts in college, when they eschew that sort of practicality for an artistic path, do you think therein that it's super important for art students to have a strong belief in their chops, in their artistic abilities? Does that compensate for that conventionality that way, would you say?
I think it's a super necessary part. I would say that confidence in what you can do is almost equal, if not more important, than the technical study of your art.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, because if you leave school and you have little to no confidence in what you can do, no one else is going to believe you and hire you either. So you
Good
you have
point.
to have that. Now, my suggestion, I think, to students is, really to keep it broad. The music industry in particular is ever changing, and so it's
Mhm.
never a bad idea if you have the opportunity to take an entrepreneurial class or a business class and kind of get something like that, because there's so many options now in the music business, in the music industry. And so having some know-how in
Mhm.
in those areas is never going to be a bad thing.
Yeah,
But I would argue that having confidence in your art, in your abilities, you have to have that before you can really convince others that you can do it. And
yep.
there are people that I've seen singers in particular, they're the most talented people in the world, but they don't either know how to be a good colleague, or they don't have that confidence in what they can do. And I've seen them really not take off, where I've seen others who maybe are slightly less talented than, say, those others, but they're confident. They go for what they want, and they really know how to kind of work the business, work the room, and they're
Yeah.
successful to this day. So, you know, it's not always just about the technical skill and the talent. There is another component to it that is
Yeah.
equally, if not more important.
Right. Right. If you hadn't gone into music, what area or areas do you imagine you would have gone into?
I I think we talked earlier, and medicine was really
Okay.
something. The idea of getting to help people on that side of things. You know, I think specifically, I really wanted to be an OBGYN. That had always
Yeah.
really appealed to me.
Yep.
But I think just kind of, again, it's that idea of that one-on-one interaction that you get, and you get to
Hmm.
getting to help people. And I still get
Right.
to do that today, just in a little different way.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. Uh, in our seminar classes here in CAST, we talk about how UNL students know coming in that their class schedules will tap into a lot of different disciplines outside their majors. And we discuss how that makes one a more well-rounded person. Do you recall which courses you took outside your major as an undergrad that were particularly impactful for you?
Yeah. So I think there are some courses, like one course that sticks out to me in particular is I took a German literature class, and um, it was more, I think that one was impactful because I got to see kind of the context of where these writers were at, and so I was able to transfer some of that kind of to singing and to
Yeah.
these German composers more specifically. So that was really, really insightful. Another fun class, this was actually in my graduate degree, and I was able to fit this in, but I was able to take modern dance
Oh,
for a
wow.
semester. And that was, just learning kind of how to connect with my body. It really influenced
Yeah.
singing and finding another outlet for creativity, even though it wasn't directly related to singing and music. Was really, really impactful. And if nothing else, just kind of, it's important to find those things to give your brain kind of a rest from what you do all the time. And those other classes, which may seem like, oh, it's not directly related to what I want to do, I have no connection, they do tend to, you'll find that you draw on things from those classes
Yeah.
for your creativity or for your major that you really never would have thought of. So um you know uh now, not every one of them, I can't tell you anything that I really drew from my geology class that I had to take, in undergrad, but it may come up, and
Sure.
I'm still glad that I took it. And but I think it really is important. We sometimes, as artists, I think, can get so hyper focused
Yeah.
on our art that we don't see that it's like, the more you can open yourself up to other venues, and the more you can learn about different subjects, it really is an avenue for creativity. And more often than not, you'll find that they do work their way back into
Yes.
your art and are very, very beneficial.
Absolutely. Would you characterize your undergraduate degree as a positive experience overall?
I would, let's see, Fort Hayes is, I think, like a Division II university, so it's not quite as big as UNL, but I think in terms of maybe the format, I could say it's
Hmm.
comparable.
Okay.
Um, but it really was a pleasant experience. I was involved. It was a great time for me. I was involved as a resident assistant,
Okay.
and as well as being a part of the music department. And involved in other clubs. And so it was a great opportunity for me to, yes, study music, but, I was able to make lifelong friends, not only in the music department, but in different disciplines. And yeah, overall, it was just a really great experience,
Oh,
I would say.
that's terrific. Was it then a big transition for you to come to Lincoln and UNL, or was that a pretty smooth transition therein?
Well, a little, I would say it was pretty smooth, but there were some things, Hayes is not, Fort Hays State University is in Hayes, Kansas, and Hayes is not a huge town. I would say
Yeah.
Lincoln is probably close to 10 times the size of Hayes. And
Okay.
so now I think people would laugh thinking of Lincoln as kind of this big city, but to me it really was when I
Sure.
came here. It,
Yeah.
it felt it felt huge. And then the graduate degree, there's really is more of a focus on your major. There's not as
Yeah.
much time to kind of get out and get involved in other university activities, and things like that. So I think for the most part, it was a fairly smooth transition, but I kind of had to, even though it was only from Kansas to Nebraska, there was still a little bit of that culture shock, I think, for me.
Oh, sure.
Just
Yeah.
just going to a bigger place,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
acclimating to a new environment.
Sure. At this point, do you feel like Lincoln and the Midwest generally suit you?
Yeah, I really like Lincoln. I think there's a lot of opportunity here. I I could see myself eventually maybe moving somewhere slightly bigger, but
Okay.
there is a lot of opportunity to be had here, and especially if you include Omaha in that as
Right.
well.
Right.
Um, for the most part, though, I do see myself kind of staying more in the Midwest areas. I've been to New York and I've been to the coasts, and they are great. I just don't, probably for myself, I don't foresee myself ever calling that my home base.
Sure. And it seems like you have a perspective now where you see that you don't have to go to New York and debut at the Met in order to make your mark or to do what makes you happy that way.
Yes, there, like I said, there is a lot of opportunity here, and I think
Yeah.
that there's a misconception that maybe people in the Midwest don't have the same respect or interest in opera that we see on the coast. And I just think that's not true. I think it's probably just not as common here. We don't
Hmm.
have as many
Hmm.
houses, but I think when people are presented with the opportunity and they get to experience opera and classical music, there's the same amount of interest, and people really do enjoy it and find something in it. And so I think there is that hunger in the Midwest, just as there is on the coast, and you can
Yeah.
certainly make a career um, doing it. I'm really an advocate for opera and classical music to keep going in the Midwest, and
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
hopefully we can develop more venues for that, so that
Absolutely.
it's accessible to more people.
Right. I'm exhibit A of that. The more people that find out about it, the more that they will see how great it is that way. Now, I know that in your doctoral program here at UNL, you focused on micro operas. Could you say more about that?
Yeah, so micro operas, it's kind of a new term, but what they are these, essentially, the short definition is they are these operas that are under 20 minutes. They're
Okay.
relatively easy to stage. You're looking at a really modest sets. Um, and generally, you're looking at a max performing force of 10 people, and that's including the instrumental ensemble and the performers on stage. Um, my definition of micro opera in my document kind of had more of a focus on them. They tend to be focused on more topical plots.
Hmm.
So during COVID, we had a lot of micro operas written about COVID, but they're micro operas that are, the romantic, modern day romantic comedies. We have a lot that are focused on social justice issues. So, and I really became interested in this topic because we saw with with COVID, a lot more of these operas, micro operas, being written, because it was one of our few performance avenues, because
Yeah.
it required a small amount of people. They're very, they adhere well to a digital format, which was also, I think, a reason they were really being written during COVID, because you could, perform them over Zoom really easily. You could
Okay.
record them safely.
Yeah.
And so I became interested in it because, with this idea of accessible opera, if people cannot go into a large opera house, maybe they don't have access to one. Like here in the Midwest, we don't have as many opera houses, or
Huh?
perhaps maybe the ticket isn't as affordable. What are some ways that we can get opera to people, in a way that, maybe we take out a little bit of the fanfare, but we get the essence of opera really close to people, and so they don't have to perhaps travel or pay, an exorbitant amount for a ticket price. And micro operas, I became really passionate about it because it's a really great avenue. You can perform them just on the street. They've been performed in train stations, and then the online accessibility. Um,
Yeah.
and they're especially great for new opera goers because, the time limit, you're not asking people to commit hours and hours of time. If they're a new opera goer, that might be a little bit intimidating, but if people can commit anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes, they get to experience opera, and that might, entice them to explore the genre more. So
Sure.
it's a really cool, innovative, genre.
It sounds like it. And with your overall passion for making opera more accessible to people, it sounds like the perfect topic for you to have explored in your doctoral program.
Yeah, yeah, it's really fascinating, and there's a lot out there.
Yeah.
I have a list that just keeps growing and growing, that I keep track of all the micro operas that have been written.
Okay.
And it just every day it feels like there's more to add to the list.
Right, right. That's terrific. I want to ask you, as an artist, how do you manage to take all of the criticism that you necessarily must from your instructors or directors? And I'm not very good at this. I've played in rock bands for years in town and whatnot. And I always think when your dreams are so personal as they are when you're an artist, how do you not then take criticism personally? But I know you mustn't.
It's difficult, and I think over the years, like from taking voice lessons and different things like that, you do sort of tend to develop that thicker skin. But it is
Okay.
hard when it's so personal, because it's even a little bit different, I would say, than, an instrumentalist, because
Yeah.
your voice, it is
Yeah.
your
It's
instrument,
you.
it's
It's
you.
you. Yeah.
And so it's hard to not feel like somebody is like attacking you when they're giving you criticisms.
Exactly.
You know, there's times when again, what we kind of talked about earlier, that sense of self and that sense of, you know, you really believing in yourself, that has to
Yeah.
be there, because,
Okay.
um, and it's not easy to find, like, you have to develop that. But I think just having a belief in yourself and what you do, and knowing that you really do love this, that comes into it. There's also a part, sometimes you have to weigh who's worth taking criticism from.
Okay. Okay.
Sometimes there are people that are going to give you criticism, and it's really to your benefit, and
Yeah.
it's constructive and it's helpful. And I think, those are the people that really want to see you do well, and
Yeah.
they're giving you this feedback because they want you to be better. And
Right.
then you are going to have the people who, they may be giving you like this criticism, and they don't really have your best
Yeah.
interest at heart, and
Yeah.
they're not coming at it from, um, a helpful perspective.
Right.
And
Right.
you kind of have to be able to weigh out and see who's worth,
Yeah,
remembering. And
sure.
that takes a little time, especially when you're younger. It's hard to separate those things.
Yeah, yeah,
But I can say, if you really cling to that belief in yourself, and try your best to delineate,
yeah,
what's important and what's not, kind of find your
sure,
team of
sure.
people that is worth listening to, and find, uh, the people that are going to support you and what you're doing. That's what's really important. But it's hard. It's hard
I
as a
bet it
singer.
is. Does
Um,
does that belief in yourself almost borderline in some way on a little bit of cockiness? Is that necessary to get better?
you know, in some, that's hard to say, because I grew up, and I was probably, when I was growing up, I was quiet, really, really humble, just would never have thought of
Yeah,
myself as an overly confident or even
me
cocky
neither.
person.
And we're Midwesterners, so we're not supposed to be.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. We answer everything with like an apology. Um,
Yeah.
but, I think you don't necessarily have to be cocky. There are people who it can definitely come off as cocky, and you deal with that as you can. But
Maybe
it
that's
has
just a
to really
survival
be,
mechanism. I'm not sure.
it is sometimes. I mean, it really is. There are situations where you do just kind of have to fake it till you make it.
Yeah, yeah,
And the more you just act confident, sometimes it does kind of bring that up forth from you, especially if you're not naturally a confident person. um I've never found I mean, and maybe others have different opinion, I never have found myself to kind of edge on cocky. But you do have to have that certain sense of self where,
yeah,
if somebody else may not like it, and that's on them, I'm
yeah,
still like who I am. I still like the product that I'm producing, and they're just going to have to deal with it. So
sure.
you do have to have a little bit of that attitude, because inevitably there's always going to be somebody that has something to say about your art
Yeah,
or your
yeah,
singing or your performance. And you know if you can listen to those people, but generally you kind of just have to blow it off.
yep,
And you know so I mean, it doesn't hurt to have, kind of edge on cockiness, but you have to be careful with that, because you want people to want to work with you and want to interact with
sure,
you
sure,
again.
sure. Yeah, absolutely. Uh, Lily of Omaha asks in continuation about the mental health side of being a performance artist, and I'll ask specifically: can a vocal music department be both a competitive environment where everyone's jockeying for a limited number of available roles, but also at the same time have a great camaraderie therein as well?
It can, and it's a hard balance to find, I think.
Okay.
But I think there are places that take it too far,
Yeah.
and it really does become very dog eat dog. And I
Okay.
think you're really missing out on that element of community when you look
Yeah.
at it that way. But I think there is, a healthy amount of competition where, students are working hard, and in working hard, you're making each other better because the bar is constantly being raised. That can be a really, really good thing. Where it edges on unhealthy is when we start putting down other
Yeah.
artists, or bringing
Yeah.
down other artists in order to make ourselves look better. And I think if you can find a department or encourage um, an attitude of excellence where we are working to make each other better, um, that is really important. And an environment of support where,
Yeah.
you know, you want your friend to be, what your friend's
Sure.
success doesn't diminish you as
Yes.
an artist. And you can look to them if they're finding success, maybe look at ways that, well, how were they going about that they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
pulling things from there.
Mm-hmm.
But I think anytime it becomes about, a ranking system, or,
Yeah.
bringing others down in order to make one singer better than the other, that's when it really can become toxic.
Yeah.
And that is a shame, because that's not what music is about. Music is
Sure.
about collaboration and community, really at its
Right.
core.
Right.
And it's sad when we miss out on that, you know.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Dr. Shoemaker, how often do you rehearse, and where do you rehearse? And do you have a set routine in place?
So I practice every day, or I try to practice every day.
Okay.
Some days are better than others, but I have my practice times built into my schedule,
Okay.
because I adjunct at 3 different schools, and I do a lot of traveling in the car. And so I have to kind of set it in my schedule. And
Yeah.
I try to get a certain amount in every day. And I've got, 3 or 4 different projects going. So I have to make sure I'm committing a certain amount of time to each project throughout my week. And so, it sometimes will vary week to week. If I know I'm having a super crazy week with teaching or performances, I might vary my practice schedule a little bit. But yeah, for me, it's a daily practice that I just work into my schedule like I do everything else. And yeah, it's pretty vital. Even as you become a teacher and stuff, I think it's so important to keep up your craft and keep up your
Yeah.
routine in that regard.
Absolutely. Do you utilize the rehearsal spaces at the different schools that you teach at, or do you rehearse at home, or?
It really depends. At each school I do have an office
Okay.
space, and so generally if I'm there and I have time between lessons, I will use just my office. There's a piano in there, and I'll
Okay.
rehearse. I do have a piano at home in a room, and so I'll rehearse at home if that's where I happen to be. But yeah, generally it's either in my office spaces or in my home
Okay.
studio.
Okay. One of your fellow Kansans, Kiera of Galesburg, Kansas, asks, how many languages can you sing in?
Let's see. I've sung in obviously English, French, German, Italian. I've sung in Spanish. I've sung in Hebrew and
Wow.
Yiddish. I haven't done as much Russian. That's something I'd love to explore a little bit more. But I'm not fluent in any other language than English. I have a little bit from each of those, but
Yeah. Yeah.
um, really you can learn to sing in any language. It's not too hard. We have something called the International Phonetic Alphabet that we use as singers to learn
Okay.
how to pronounce different languages correctly. Um, and then you always want to work with a coach or
Yeah.
a native speaker generally to kind of make sure you're getting the nuances of the language down. But yeah, I've sung in a number of languages, and hopefully would love to sing in more. But
Yeah. That's
yeah,
really
it
impressive. Minna of Lincoln asks, have you ever made a noticeable mistake in a performance, and how did you recover?
Oh my goodness. I don't think, and I think a lot of singers would agree, I don't think there's any performance where I felt like I have not made a mistake of some kind. I've had some that you're able to cover, and then you sometimes just have those ones where it is like a flub. Gosh, I'll share kind of one of my more embarrassing ones. I was in an opera, and it's an opera. It's called La Cenerentola by Rossini. And I was playing the main character, Cinderella. And at the end of the whole opera, she's been doing all this singing throughout. And at the end, he puts her aria, her main song, at the very end of the opera, and it's probably the hardest thing to sing out of anything she's had to sing for the previous 2 hours.
Oh my.
And I, you know, I felt like I was just on fire. I was doing so well. And I got to that aria, and the very last note, the note very last thing sung for the entire opera, I got to the big high note and I just cracked. My voice just went, oh! And I remember, I mean, at that point, there was really nothing you can do. You're kind of just there and you have to just kind of own it. And, the curtain closed and I had to go out for my bow. And of course, in my brain, I'm just going, oh my gosh, I just want to like run off stage. I just want to go and hide. And so in that particular instance, I just kind of had to get over it and go, well, what did I learn from this?
Yeah,
And,
yeah. What else are you gonna do?
you know, but then you have those other ones where it's like, I've had performances where I'm like, oh my gosh, that was probably just awful. And I go up to my husband and he goes, oh, it was great. I didn't even notice that thing that you did. So, you kind of have to, a lot of times the mistakes, you're going to notice them because you know the music.
Yeah.
Your accompanist or your pianist might go, oh yeah, pianists are the greatest people in the world. They can cover all manner of sins in a performance. So always be kind to your pianist because they can really save you. But, mistakes are just inevitable. And when
Yeah.
especially in performance, because there's a magical thing that can happen with performance because you're getting that energy from the audience. But also, you're slightly more nervous. Their energy is really high. And it's just inevitable that things are going to, you might have something happen. It's like, I've never done that before in
Yeah.
any rehearsal. And it happens in performance. And, you just kind of have to, if you kind of just accept that no performance is ever going to be perfect,
Yeah.
but you keep your goals in mind. And I think your goal as a singer should always be to really communicate with your audience, to really
Right.
say something. And if
Right.
you keep that at the forefront, all the other stuff,
Sure.
just, you can let it go.
That's good
Yeah.
advice. Speaking of audience, as a performing artist, how important is audience approval for you? If an audience or critics are harsh, does that tend to ruin some of the enjoyment for you? Or what are your thoughts on that?
It can. It definitely gets hard. It feels, you enjoy it when the audience, and I mean, it's a great feeling when you get that standing ovation and you can tell the audience just loved what you did. And, and it's also a really cruddy feeling if you feel like the audience was just not engaged or they didn't enjoy it. But it kind of comes back to, why are you doing it? And
Yeah.
if you are out there singing to get other people's approval, you're never going to be satisfied. And so, while the accolades can be really, really great, they can't be your reason for doing it.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think, again, that comes back to having that really solid sense of self and sense of, passion for what you do, and being able to kind of take what comes and just really be able to stick with it because you love it. You love what you do. Um, and I would say, like, rather than focusing on whether they're going to like it or not, focus on what you're saying and how you're communicating. And I think if you redirect your focus, you'll always get some sort of satisfaction that you are, you're being a true artist, I guess.
Sure, that's a great approach. Couple student questions here. Alexa of Omaha asks, for someone that's never experienced opera before, do you feel like it's a big transition from, say, musical theater? And Will of Waverly asks, how is operatic singing different from other kinds of singing?
Yeah. So, I think it really depends. I think for some, and Dan, you can probably speak to this too. It can be a big transition. I mean, there's a lot of things about opera. Oftentimes operas are in a foreign language. The style of singing is very specific. I would say you don't necessarily hear this particular style of singing in other venues a lot, and so it can be, perhaps for some people, pretty jarring. You've got a full orchestra.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it can be, I hope it's jarring in a good way. And
Right.
you can find something really enjoyable kind of about the excitement of it. I think for some people it can be, I can understand why it's a little harder to connect with, again, with if there's the language barrier. Even a lot of times we do provide subtitles of some kind, but some people don't connect to that as well. Or, the length of time is sometimes a barrier for people. If it's 3 hours, and, it's like you're used to sitting through 30-second TikToks, that's
Yeah. Yeah.
quite a
Yeah.
difference. So, I think it can be jarring, but I think it's also, we now have multiple definitions of what opera can be, from
Yeah.
the micro operas that we talked about earlier, where they are in English and they're shorter, or we've got our full length, more typical operas where we have, you know, um, um, in foreign languages and kind of with a full fanfare. And so I think there really is something for everybody. You just have to kind of look past what I think the stereotype of opera is, which,
Sure.
we think of the lady with the horned hat and,
Yeah. Yeah.
things like that. Um, and then to answer, was the second question, how is
Oh,
opera different from
yeah. How
other
is
types of
operatic
singing?
singing different from other types of singing?
So, yeah, it really depends on, I guess, the type of singing. If you compare it to, let's say, musical theater singing, obviously what we have is, opera is one of the few unamplified um, types of singing that we see in the performance industry, unless you're doing something like an acoustic set or something like that. Sometimes you don't have it amplified. Really, what it comes down to is probably the training and the way we utilize the instrument. And so,
Hmm.
if I were to compare it to musical theater singing, um, we tend to sing with access perhaps to maybe a larger resonance space
Okay.
in opera. So we really think about a lot of space in the pharynx, which is kind of that space behind the sinuses, behind the mouth. Really thinking of optimizing that as a resonator is a big part of our technical training. And what that does is allows us to project that sound over an
Yeah.
orchestra and to be heard. So I would say, I mean, opera differs from others in that you really have to think about optimizing the instrument, and you want to get the most bang for your buck in terms of sound, because you have to be able to carry. Um, Whereas, in certain pop styles or even musical theater, that's not as much of a concern. So in some ways, you almost have more freedom in those styles to kind of do certain things. Like, if I'm thinking of the singer Billie Eilish, she tends to
Yeah.
utilize a very characteristic, somewhat breathy tone that I think works
Uh-huh.
really well for her. But in an opera context, that just wouldn't work, because that style of singing is never going to be able to carry.
Right.
And
Right.
it's not meant to. But I think that's some of the main differences. Is from a technical standpoint, we have to look at it as having enough resonance and stamina to sing for 3 hours straight
Yeah.
and sing in really extreme ranges. And
Yeah.
so
That's a
there's
whole
a
other ball
different
game.
it's a different technical aspect than certain other styles.
Right. Speaking of Billie Eilish and rock and pop music, I mentioned I've played in rock bands for years in town, and I just do home recording now. But I've always been fascinated, curious to know what opera singers like yourself think of rock and pop music. Is that what's your angle on that?
I have a great respect for it. I mean,
Really?
yeah, oh, of
I
course,
guess
because
I sit there kind of with some inferiority complex, I suppose. But
oh no.
okay,
No, I think it's different, but I think one is not better than the other. It's just a different style. Gosh, there are rock singers that can do things with their voice that I can't even dream of probably being able to do.
yeah,
And it's just there are different techniques
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say, there's sometimes a stigma, I think, and an elitism that comes with opera.
Yeah.
Um, and to say that, you always will hear there are some voice teachers that'll go, oh, well, classical training is the best training and it's the most healthy training, and you really should. And I just don't personally really subscribe to that, because what I do is not necessarily going to be that helpful to a rock singer.
Okay.
And I think that's okay, and so I always modify, I teach singers who want to sing more in a pop style, and I don't bring some of the same approaches for a classical singer to that I would to a pop singer. And I think um I think classical music, in order to grow, really needs to kind of dispel with some of that
Yeah.
elitism, because
Yeah.
I have great respect for pop singers and rock singers, because there's a lot of musicality in what they do, and the technical demands. Oh my goodness, I think Beyonce has one of the most phenomenal voices of our age, and the things that she can do
Hmm.
with her voice, as far as the agility and the power that she has, are amazing. So I have great respect for it, and I really enjoy listening to pop and rock
Do
music,
you
because it's
really?
a nice, yeah, it's a nice, if you can get so locked in to one genre, but
Yeah.
again, you're really limiting your creativity.
Yeah.
um
Do you have
by
favorite
lock
bands that you listen to?
Yeah. So gosh, I'm really all over the place with what I
Okay.
listen to musically. I like a lot of oldies. My dad listened to a lot of 70s rock groups, because that was the era he grew up in. So I really love Eric Clapton. I love Fleetwood Mac, Boston, Kansas, I love listening to them. I love, I'm trying to think. George Ezra is kind of a pop singer I'm really into right now.
Do you like the
There's
Beatles, the Beach Boys?
Yeah, I love the Beatles. Who can't love the Beatles? I mean, I don't think you love music if you don't love the Beatles.
Yeah.
And yeah, Scary Pockets is kind of a cool group. They do a lot of jazz kind of restyled covers of famous songs. And so, I think it's important, yeah, just to take all that in. It's a great sometimes I know, as a singer, if I listen to people, if you listen to music, you can almost find it to be a job, because you're analyzing all the time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's important to really take a breath, take a step back, and just enjoy. And
Yeah.
sometimes that, if you can listen to things outside of your specific genre, that really helps you to just kind of begin to enjoy music again, as opposed to looking at it as a task.
Dr. Shoemaker, you already rule the roost around here with opera music, but if you should ever decide to go the rock and roll route, you would really be tops around here. So please let me know if you ever decide to make that transition.
Oh, for sure. You'll be the first to know.
Very good. Couple questions as we finish up here. Would you say, more interested in the performance of music, or are you interested also in recording, for instance?
Um, I've done some recordings, like
Okay.
just this past summer. Elizabeth Doyle, who's a composer out of Chicago, she wrote a song cycle, and so we premiered it and did the premiere recording of it. And it's a really cool song cycle if you ever get to check it out. But it's kind of a mix of jazz and classical styles and French cabaret and things like that.
Is that
So
available for people to?
I'm not sure where it's available.
Okay.
If they're still maybe working on it, if I'll
Okay.
let you know if
Sure.
it goes out somewhere. But we just recorded it this summer, so I do some recording. I would
Yeah.
say personally, at this stage, I'm a little bit more interested in the live performance side of
Yeah.
things. But
Yeah.
recording is definitely, composers are writing things all the time, and they need people to sing their music. And so when I'm approached, I'm definitely always excited and involved. And
I
but I
imagine
would say,
I imagine you're pretty selective about who you work with.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends. If I know, generally it's through people I already know. And
Sure.
so like Elizabeth was a good friend of a pianist that I work with regularly, and so I trust his judgment. And Elizabeth is a wonderful, wonderful person, as it turns out. And so sometimes you're selective, but then there are other times, it's like it's nice to get paid to sing, so you take
Sure.
advantage of the
You
opportunity.
bet. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, as we close here, Dr. Shoemaker, I'm interested to know what upcoming projects, shows are coming down the pike for you, things that we might be on the lookout for to hear you sing in the future.
Yeah, so the thing that I have coming up, probably the closest thing I have coming up, is I'll be performing in an opera in November,
Okay.
Alcina by Handel. So I'll be performing the role of Bradamante, and that will take place in Kansas City. Um, so that's right around the corner. I'll be singing in The Messiah with Hastings Symphony in December. Um, Moving into January, I'll be presenting at the National Opera Association conference and performing there. And that'll be in Phoenix, Arizona. And then in the spring, I have a myriad of concerts that I'll be performing in and appearing in. And that schedule's up on my website. But yeah,
That is
so
awesome. HayleyShoemaker.com, if that's
yes,
correct. Yeah, well,
yes.
that's awesome to know that you're still very active. And for fans of yours that have seen you with UNL Opera, there's some opportunities coming up to continue to hear your work that way.
Yes, and and I'll also be performing just in the chorus, but I'm involved with Opera Omaha, and so I'll be performing in Don Pasquale with them, and that'll be coming up in October. So
Wow, that's just terrific. Very good. Dr. Shoemaker, I've only got 15 more pages of questions here for you, and we're out of time, but I really want to stress it's just been an amazing opportunity to speak with you. I'm a big fan. It's a real personal honor to have you join us here today.
Oh, thank you so much, Dan. It's just been an absolute pleasure to get to talk with you today, and I'm so thankful that you guys got to bring me on. So thank you
Oh,
so much for having me.
you bet. The pleasure is all ours. I wish you all the best going forward and hope to see you at a future performance.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dan.
Okay, take care.